All right, can everybody hear me? Are we doing okay?
You are good. We can hear you, we can see you, and
Awesome.
we can see your slides.
Awesome. Perfect. So I will start talking so that you can get back to the cat that clearly needs more attention. And I accept that and it's okay. So hey everybody, my name is PJ Hagerty. I'm a developer advocate. A little bit about me. I'm a lucky person. I get to travel the world talking about technology. Not so much in the last couple of years. Beyond that, I'm also a dad. I love karaoke. I've been a musician for years. I used to coach hockey when my son was small. And at one point, about 11 years ago, I did allow my 11-year-old to get on stage and keynote RubyConf, which is not an experience I recommend for anyone. But that's a little bit about me. I should also mention where I work. I work at a company called Mattermost. We're an open source platform for secure communication, collaboration, and orchestration of work across tools and teams. So it's kind of like a communication tool, but on top of that, there's other tools that you can use to collaborate, set up playbooks, do some DevOpsy stuff, and do it all in one place. It's really cool. And if you have questions about Mattermost, I'm happy to answer them, but I'm not actually here to talk about that today. What I am here to talk about is a little bit of history. So I know people are probably watching from all over the world. So let me go back and clarify a few things. Many people who watch Western movies and modern takes on the romantic American Western movement believe in certain things. The good guys always wore white hats. They always won the day. Everything west of the Mississippi River was lawless. Some bank robbers weren't such bad people, and the Pony Express was how mail got delivered. To many people, these are facts, dearly held beliefs that have been allowed to become the stories that we build other stories on. But if we look closely, there's a few holes in these stories, and some of these holes are kind of huge, kind of gaping. So before even the Civil War, some folks decided to head out west to seek their fortunes. The United States was trying to achieve this goal called Manifest Destiny, which was expanding from the East Coast to the West Coast. For some people, this meant opportunity, be it to find farmland, to establish new freedoms, find gold lying in them there hills across America. When prospectors found gold on the California coast, towns began to pop up all along the coast. It was necessary for people, both companies who owned the land or paid prospectors and families of these adventurous souls, to get mail as quickly as possible. These remote locations were growing. Between 1848 and 1860, the population of California grew to 380,000 people. With a very few ways to get information from one end of the country to the other, a new solution had to be found. A lot of you are probably saying, well, why wouldn't they use the railroads, PJ? Railroads could get messages a good portion of the way across the continent, but they couldn't make it much further than Missouri, which is about halfway, and I'm being very gracious there. When the United States gained New Mexico and Arizona as states in 1853, we could only just start to consider bringing the coast together via rail. And let's be honest, the railroad back then was no guarantee of speed or safety. It was kind of like having a server in the closet being maintained by someone with a general idea of how to run Linux or Ubuntu. And they made their own Cat5 cables, not using a crimper, but just using like a wire cutter. And all of these were entwined in unsafe ways throughout this closet that had no ventilation. You all know what I'm talking about. If you've been in tech long enough, you know what happened before cloud. We'll get back to that later, but it was unsafe, it was unstable, it was prone to robbery. The railroad could not be the right answer for this growing country. So add all these things together, and there's this aggravating edge case, a small inconvenience, the idea of who is doing all this work, who is building this railroad. At the time, there were some people who wanted to bring the country together and make it this great utopian farmland thing. And there's others who wanted to remain on top of the pile, making money while oppressing other human beings. War was on the horizon. If we wanted to continue to be successful and move forward as a country, we needed a way to communicate quickly. On the eve of the American Civil War, the Pony Express was born. A network was built. Riders, generally young, often orphans or escaped slaves, would be hired to ride like the wind. The Pony Express began its ride on April 3rd, 1860. Suddenly, you could get a message from New York City to San Francisco in just 10 days. It was a miracle in modern communications. If we've learned anything from the movies about the Pony Express, or even just movies that feature the Pony Express, it's about how ubiquitous and long-lasting it was. It seems like every Western has some reference to the Pony Express. Some guy riding in, I've got a message to Pony Express. Oh, this is what we've been waiting for. There have been movies and television shows dedicated to these brave riders and their horses flying across the plains, outwitting dangerous animals, bandits, and Native Americans who were kind of upset that we kept taking their lands and territories. And the Native Americans were pretty right on that one. The Pony Express, a paragon of innovation in April of 1860. However, this great technique for moving messages coast to coast was outdated after a mere year and a half, 18 months. We've had a pandemic that lasted longer than the Pony Express. The needs of the people and the speed of technology overtook the Western riders. So instead of innovation, the Pony Express was really just a stopgap method and would have remained a footnote in American history were it not for the so-called penny dreadfuls that raised the Pony Express rider to heroic status almost immediately. A simple device at the time, a time when war was starting and communication needed to move faster than ever before. All this culminated in the end of the Pony Express after a mere 18 months. As a side note, this is a telegraph. Think of the telegraph and the Pony Express the next time you have a conversation about machines replacing people or automation. Automation is not a new issue. When's the last time you tipped an elevator operator? You probably have never even seen one. If the Pony Express was a stopgap, how long did the telegraph last? Couldn't last long, right? I mean, we're at the 1860s and we're talking about the telegraph. Like, there's no way that lasts a long time. But it's funny you should ask, actually. Perhaps you've heard of a British person, sometimes called the father of modern computer science. In World War II, about 80 years after the Civil War, so give or take about 7 times as long as the Pony Express, Alan Turing was in England in the 1940s trying to decipher telegraph messages that were encoded using the above machine known as Enigma. Enigma was a way to encrypt and decrypt messages sent via telegraph by the German soldiers during World War II. 80 years. Some pieces of technology last a long time. Some solutions fade quickly or have limited use and disappear. We see this all the time in the application development world. So unless you plan to share your thoughts on this talk on your Bebo page or go to LiveJournal, maybe think about how fast technology moves. So let's take a look at some things and see their lasting power. Maybe we can speculate on what has staying power, what's more of a flash in the pan, which if you ever heard the term flash in the pan, fun fact, it's actually a reference to the 1849 gold prospecting time when you would tip the pan into the sun to see if you get a glint of metal that wasn't water or sand. So a little bit of information for you there. So let's get into philosophy. Oh, we're going to go deep. We're going to go deep on this one, folks. We'll start with a little lesson. Philosophies around technology are not a new phenomenon. Whether it's the idea that the mainframe computing is the only true computer science solution to the idea that DevOps can be certified and assigned as a team, there have never been a shortage of ideologies that accompany the work we do. Most philosophies are really meant as best practices that allow our work to flow easily and produce better applications or run better networks or data centers on Earth and in the cloud. Doesn't really matter. They're kind of a suggestion. Some are only suggestions because something worked on my machine, so it must work for everyone else. These aren't great. Let's take a look at the most common modern era philosophies. I'm being very generous with the term modern here, and see what the strengths are and where the pitfalls might be. Waterfall. So waterfall is one of the most well-known and much maligned development methods in the world today. How many of you have been involved in an organization using the waterfall technique? You don't have to raise your hands. I can't see you. For those who are not in the know, here's the definition of waterfall, and I'm going to put on my definition voice. The waterfall model is a relatively linear, sequential design approach for certain areas of engineering design. In software development, it tends to be among the less iterative and flexible approaches, as progress flows largely in one direction, downwards like a waterfall, though the phases of conception, initiation, analysis, construction, testing, deployment, and maintenance. Okay, so there's your definition of waterfall. That probably doesn't sound too unfamiliar to a lot of people. Pretty thorough for an idea that was developed in the 1950s. A mere 10 years or so after Turing was dealing with the telegraph, we were trying to find a way for engineering techniques to work in computer science. 10 years. And, fun fact, that's mostly because Turing was absolutely stunning with what he did and really helped modern computer science to be a thing. So, innovative for its time, though even shortly after this, people began to see the flaws. By the way, I will Occasionally say the word falls for flaws. I apologize for that. This is a picture of Niagara Falls. I live in Buffalo, New York. Niagara Falls is not too far from here. And it's very important that you know that is what Niagara Falls generally looks like. File that back in your head for later. Waterfall is simple. As our programming teams begin to build applications for business and scientific inquiry, we needed a way to establish how things were organized. How did we move forward in an organized way? So is it in any way surprising that in the 1950s, our first thought was to take a page from modern manufacturing techniques? To build a car, you establish requirements. You design it using those requirements. You build the car. You test to see if it works by driving it around. Then maybe you do some maintenance when it's out in the world. Easy, right? Why wouldn't software work in the same rigid way? The problem with this philosophy, like so many ideas, like the Pony Express, is short-sightedness. What works in one industry does not necessarily work for another. In a few minutes, I'll start discussing the Agile methodology, much of which focuses on the concept of lean, an idea that was brought over from Japan's car manufacturers. There's a difference in how these ideas were adopted. For Agile, we borrowed. We took a little bit here and there. With Waterfall, we just took it all. Waterfall has no iteration. There's no feedback loop. There's no structure for movement outside of the specs. Most people know when an organization is not flexible, it spells doom. Waterfall was a doomed philosophy before it got off the ground. Yet, parts of it are still used to this day in large-scale corporations. Now, you remember a few minutes ago when I said take note of Niagara Falls? This is Niagara Falls in the late 1950s and early 1960s when they decided that to prevent erosion, as you can see, there's lots of rocks at the bottom because water, 60,000 gallons of water per minute falling over a cliff tends to erode the cliff. Fun fact. They actually stopped Niagara Falls. They put up a dam and stopped it so they could put metal rods in. They thought this was a great idea because what do you do to support a building when it needs to be restructured? You put metal rods in it. Well, that doesn't work for a waterfall. They had to stop it twice, first to put the rods in, then to come back and take the rods out because drilling the rods in caused more erosion. That's what short-sightedness gets you. More damage, less control. So let's talk a little bit about Agile. Agile is more modern. It's more widely accepted as far as philosophies go in the world of tech. While the world conjures up images that may or may not work along with the ideas of the philosophy, let's define it before we make any decisions on how we feel about it. Definition voice. Agile is an approach to software development under which requirements and solutions evolve through the collaborative effort of self-organizing and cross-functional teams and their customers or end users. It advocates adaptive planning, evolutionary development, early delivery, and continual improvement, and it encourages rapid and flexible response to change. This sounds amazing after Waterfall. Self-organizing teams, iterative development, customer input. What could go wrong? So Agile is a space-age solution. Everything we're looking for is there. Iteration, collaboration, flexibility. At the advent of Agile, which is, by the way, the 1970s, there still wasn't much need for adherence to a software development philosophy. Most software was still built in and for large-scale corporations. Computers weren't common in homes, and even entertainment systems like ColecoVision and Atari were only just then coming into being. Agile was a sleepy philosophy for a while. Then, as modern application development and open source began to become a thing in the 90s, began to take off. We couldn't just apply normal manufacturing techniques to building and deploying software. We needed real-world ways to apply to the problem at hand. Something modern and something different. So Agile is an amazing modern workflow with a few caveats. And that really comes with the peripherals. Things like Scrum and Kanban, the add-ons that aren't really necessary and don't really contribute to the success of a team. Agile means flexible. If your team can work without the overhead of complicated necessities like daily stand-ups and raft teams, Agile will probably work for you. As with any philosophy, zealotry and strict adherence stagnates growth. If you need to follow the rules as strictly as possible, that's not very flexible. That's not very agile. As a great bonus, though, Agile led us to something new. DevOps. DevOps, oh wait, we're going to just kick in right with the definition? Absolutely. DevOps is a set of software development practices that combine software development, dev, and information technology operations. ops to shorten the system's development lifecycle while delivering features, fixes, and updates frequently in close alignment with business objectives. Different disciplines collaborate, making quality everyone's job. Personally, I love this definition. It's really what the other philosophies are striving for as far as how a tech team should function. All the best parts of Agile, a few good ideas from Waterfall, applied to all the teams across an organization. Everyone is part of the conversation. Everyone is responsible. This is our modern answer to how best deliver software. Mobile, web, OSs, doesn't matter. We've learned from the past. This is what we have. DevOps, according to some, should be the end-all, be-all of development. We introduce the concepts of interaction with developers and ops or IT. We add the folks from QA and testing. It's a great cycle. And what do we focus on? Automation. DevOps goals, according to a lot of people, is to automate as much as possible to remove risk. I mean, isn't that really what happened to the Pony Express? We needed to move the message faster. We needed to move the risk of having someone, get captured or die or whatever. So instead of doing it manually on horseback, we automated it. We built a system that made the old system less useful. Makes one wonder if the point of DevOps is to make DevOps unnecessary. Something to think about. Like all theories, DevOps is great in theory. Everyone works happily together now because we are employing DevOps, right? All problems are resolved and we all get along and the world is at peace and the applications work perfectly. DevOps, it works 60% of the time, every time. Like Waterfall and Agile before it, DevOps has one major downfall. It's based on the perfect world idea. In a perfect world, all these things work. When faced with the reality of organizations functioning at modern speed, some of these things start to fall down. This doesn't mean we should abandon all hope, all ye who DevOps, but we need to see where these philosophies work and where they don't. We need to be honest with ourselves about what's functioning and what isn't. We need to take our organization's perspective into account to achieve our goals. We need to be critical of the things we do and find the parts that don't work. Find the solutions that do. All things in tech should be in constant evolution. Whoever made a piece of software that was done? Beyond our methodologies and how the infrastructure of our team works, we kind of need to build things like it's kind of important. The product people and the money people really like it when we build things that make people money. I like to get paid. It's kind of cool. Whether in ops or dev, these ideas always come through. So we'll start with a few different ideas. Let's start with test-driven development. This is the concept that everything you build, software, hardware, application, infrastructure, database, doesn't matter, must be thoroughly tested before going out in the world. This is a great idea, except that it takes nearly twice as long to build anything. Additionally, since you never really know how people are going to use a thing once it's out in the world, it can be needlessly pedantic. So maybe behavior-driven development is better. Unlike test-driven development, behavior-driven development is based on how users interact and break the things that we do. Forward thinking, right? Let's see how users do the things and build what we need based on that information. Brilliant. Less time spent in TDD, right? Maybe. But it also leaves a huge possibility of falling over again and again. Luckily, from the BDD movement, DevOps culture has been able to adapt and adopt the concepts of chaos engineering so you can get more of that real-world focus directly with what's going on. This is great and behavior-based. So even out of the guided philosophies, we can call some good. Granted, I honestly think you need some sort of combination of these things, but I also think that there's a more adopted thing. That's shame-driven development. So what really goes on in the world, what really goes on in every organization, every team, is shame-driven development. People write as many tests as they can get away with. The next developer doesn't think they skipped it altogether. The ops person only takes their time setting up physical hardware, so it seems their time was worth what they want it to be worth. The SRE, or site reliability engineer, holds everything together with duct tape and bubblegum, but documents a well-running system. Whether DevOps or Agile or what have you, we generally build things so we won't be shamed by the next person to see it, the next engineer down the line. This is the truth of where most things live in the world of tech today. If you're not sure, change jobs a couple of times. You'll see it. Kind of like how the Pony Express was built good enough for what the United States needed at the time. We innovate, but often the focus is on making a minimal viable product, a minimal viable solution, a minimal viable setup. Minimal, viable. Yuck. So just the language we develop in comes with philosophies and ideals that matter to some, but seem to be less important as time marches on. Compiled languages versus non-compiled. Open source versus enterprise. Languages like C++ or .NET. Like we're seeing now a return turn to functional programming languages while also seeing a growth of JavaScript tools focused on building single web page applications. You have Rust and Vue living in the same unit, and it's madness. It leads to things like not needing a proper server, developing a GitHub page with Jekyll or Middleman or Gatsby.js. You don't even need a DevOps team, right? But these aren't innovations so much as iterations on the same concepts. We are building new things. So we started DevOps. Whoops, went way too fast there. Let's go back. We try to keep moving forward. DevOps is our current Pony Express. Will it last longer? Will it become the telegraph of this philosophical generation? When we think of the word innovation, we think of building something new, discovering some new territory. We've done that by bringing teams together toward the common goal. DevOps is currently helping us to take a step further by getting rid of these accoutrements of Agile, all the rules saying, hey, we all have the same goal. Let's work together and reach it. That's innovation. That's riding to outlast the competition. Technology moves fast. It's the whole point of this talk. We need to learn, adapt, and innovate if we hope to keep up. Innovation is the key to what we do. I think there's very few people who haven't heard the term like, oh, being a developer means being a lifetime learner. Being in QA means always learning something new. Working with databases means I always have something new to learn. That's kind of how innovation works. You're learning new things. You're evolving. There's an evolutionary step that takes place. And no, you're not becoming like a brand new person. Maybe you're finding brand new talents, brand new curiosities, brand new things that make you interested in the things that we do. We don't want to just be factory workers. This is where Waterfall fell down. Waterfall couldn't innovate because your job was to stamp, press, move. Stamp, press, move. It's the same idea. I'm sorry. I guess my audio is getting a little choppy. I hope that's not me. AWS US West is currently out, so I hope that's not a problem since I'm in the East. But the idea here, and that kind of puts the point to it, a lot of things don't get fixed because we don't try to innovate. We need to focus on building better, building things that we really need to build that are going to help people. Forget the idea of the minimal viable product or the minimal viable solution or the MVP concept of anything you build. Work on making a minimal valuable product, a minimal valuable application, a minimal valuable setup. That will actually give you the ways to innovate. You want to make it valuable to the people who are using it, not convenient for you to get your next round of venture capital or whatever. So we see things come and go. We see innovation built on failure. We see philosophies grow from simple adopted ideas, concepts borrowed from someone else, and then retrofitted to our needs, grown into something else and consistently evolving. We see that what was the best solution today might be outdated tomorrow. When adopting DevOps culture and ideals, we seek to find the best solution to our teams and our development and ops environments. When we look at shame-driven development, what we're really saying, and that's a bit of a joke, what we're really saying is we want to make things better. So we want to focus on actually combinations of things like TDD and BDD. We want to focus on making sure our users have the value that we're trying to provide to them. We have to question these things every step of the way. We can't accept these things blindly. You're not innovating. You're not seeing the future. You're not trying to move towards it if you're not working towards a way to make the things we build valuable to the people that we want to do. And that's automation is a major part of that. People shouldn't have to focus on so many parts of the development structure. We want to automate those things away. We want to make it easier. At some point in time, there was a young man on a horse racing across the hills of California to deliver a message. He never read it. That wasn't his job. And if we're completely honest with ourselves, he probably couldn't. His job was go from place to place. He had to know the area. He didn't have to know how to read. His job was to deliver. The message read, Telegraph service reaches San Francisco. Pony Express retired. Every point of our job in tech is to innovate and build. We continue to do so knowing that the future is the goal, not the nearby goal, the far-reaching goal. So with that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions. Go forth and innovate, folks. Am I still on? Let's see. How do I bring...
All right. There we go.
There we go. All right. There we go.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed that. I love talks that take tech concepts and things that we're thinking about and relate them to kind of earlier technology or other kinds of things. Like my very first talk was about how pro wrestling is like testing, so
Yeah,
just, what's that?
make it relatable. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like great trivia that you get to pick up along the way too, which is always awesome. I love trivia.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, if you can take a tech talk and you can turn it into some good bar trivia fodder, then I think you've done your job.
I agree. Absolutely. I really wanted to ask you some questions about value because so that's part of my job now, although it's always been part of my
Okay.
job, right?
It
Um,
should be.
yeah, but especially now moving to product, like it's extra part of my job.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you have some suggestions on how testers, both automated testers like and SDETs and maybe manual testers as well, can really identify and communicate value and what is valuable to the user or to the customer to kind of the powers that be.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things is being heavily involved with the user, with the customer, with the community that you're dealing with and understanding what it is. Even if you're an automated tester, you need to know the flow of how someone's going to move through your web application. If you want to set
Mhm.
up, like, Selenium is a great example. If you want to set up Selenium to say, okay, walk me through the authentication process and logging in. Well, it's great that you have your perspective on it, but it could be that the people out there in the world use it differently. And if you've never spoken to them, you never talked to them, you don't know what that is.
Mhm.
Um, so in my mind, like the biggest thing is like if you want to be able to communicate to purchasers, the higher ups, whoever it is that you're trying to, you have to be able to communicate with the users and use their voice. You have to be able to turn around and say, hey, listen, I know that we, built this blog and you had a lot of information from this source saying that the way to do it is, hottest topics. But in reality, our users want chronological order. Not
Yeah.
pointing out Twitter at all on this one, but people maybe want to see the feed in chronological order because that makes sense to them. Yet sometimes it seems like there's a lot of like well, we talked to these people over here who are in a focus group who decided that, but those aren't your users.
Right.
Those we have a bunch of personas set up. No. Talk to your users. Talk to the people who actually use the thing. I actually the example I use for this a lot is um, facial recognition software. And I think people have heard this example many times. There was a company that came up with this great facial recognition software. It's going to be used by the government to ID people to come into buildings like courthouses and things. And it was great, except it didn't work for anyone who wasn't a white male. Well, why did that happen? Well, because they didn't consider the people who would be using the software might be people outside of the room that they were working in. That kind of short-sightedness shows that you can't build something that's valuable. To build something that's valuable, you have to take in all aspects. And to take in all aspects, you've got to be talking to the people who are actually going to use the thing you're building.
So we have a question. I want to get to that, but I do want to throw something out for some folks. Speaking of facial recognition, there is an awesome person who is also from Buffalo, Jamie Bash,
Yes.
who,
Oh,
yes.
yes.
So I
I
love
love
Jamie.
Jamie.
Jamie does an incredible talk on the ethics of software development and thinking about
Mm-hmm.
facial recognition and AI. And because there are good applications of AI and not good applications of AI. If you have a minute, you want to just spend an hour watching a talk by a developer who's an exceptional developer who has really incredible things to say, go look up Jamie's talk on the
Definitely.
ethics of software development. I think it's the ethics of software development
Ethics
according
of
to Star
software
Wars.
development. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
It's so good.
the first time they did that talk was at CodeDaze, which is a conference that I held.
Oh, awesome.
And there was full costumage and it was pretty amazing.
That's awesome.
But yeah, Jamie is a dear friend and very, very, very whip smart, knows
Yeah.
exactly how. Yes, great talk.
Yeah.
Definitely go check it out.
But I also want to get to the question that we've got in the
Yes.
chat. So Mark asked, "What's your thought on innovation as an obsession? Can you over innovate?"
Can you over integrate? Yes. I mean, it's kind of like the can you over engineer something question. Yes, you definitely can. And I think that the concept of over innovation comes at the expense of some of the people. In some ways, we have to use the horrible like super capital examples. Like Jeff Bezos is an over innovator. Elon Musk is an over innovator. They've innovated so much that they've taken out the human part of the equation. And that you can see that obsessive over innovation actually causes real world damage. It's not just a matter of like, oh, my creation. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, Mary Shelley wrote about this in like we know how over innovation is bad. Um, Yet we don't learn. I mean, Jeff Bezos, he owned a bookstore. Did he read the book? But okay, so I digress. But yes, it is possible because often what happens is you're so focused on pushing forward, you don't understand the ramifications of the right now and the present user and the humans who are involved in the equation. So can you over innovate? Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I
That's why we
kind of
talk
want
about value. That's, Jenna asked about value. That's why value is so important. Keeping value in mind. Am I creating something people need, something people want, something they can use? That's what we should be focused on.
I absolutely agree. And again, because like you keep saying things, I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes me think of this thing. One of the big risks of over innovation is that we miss or we choose to exclude some of our, pardon me, I'm losing my voice, some of our already marginalized users. So I often
Mm-hmm.
think about when dealing with design, and I love designers. It's not a slight on designers, but we can design things that cannot be made accessible, and they
Right.
become art projects as opposed to human centric solutions. And I think that goes right to over innovation. Like we can get to a point where it only works for this very narrow segment, and sure, that's the segment that maybe fits your image of what your user is, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not maybe your true user or all of the users, because we want all of the users.
Yeah, I had a friend who talked about coder empathy, and his take was if you stand up in the room or you stand, wherever you're working, and you look around at the team you're working with, and everybody looks like you're wrong. You've done it
Mhm.
wrong, and there's no way you're taking into account every potential user. And if you really need to convince the money people of that, all you have to say is like, hey, we're losing a market segment.
Mhm.
You use their words against them. Oh, we don't want to take that into consideration. We don't want to hire, more diverse teams. Well, we're going to lose a market segment. Oh, well, if we were going to lose money, then definitely we need to do that. It's the cheap, underhanded way to bring DE and I into an organization, but it is very effective.
I mean, it is. It is. Um, and we always want the room to look like the people that are actually going to use it. We want the room to
That's
look like
right.
the real world.
Mhm.
And looking like the real world includes all of these additional layers: educational diversity, economic diversity. Um, it goes past what everybody thinks about. It goes past just race. It goes to gender. It goes to disability. All of those different kinds of things create this bigger, stronger voice.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
One of the things, I have a good friend who works in the civil rights area, and one of the things they say is like, you could call it racism, but like, isn't like the race is human? Why aren't we building everything for all the humans? Like we're all human. Why aren't we building it for all of them? And I agree with that sentiment a lot. I think that, that's something I strive for in my career. Have I always achieved it? No, it's a constant process.
mhm,
But that's where, innovation can be a personal thing. Innovate yourself to, remove your biases, see more clearly about how you're not looking at things through the right lens, understand your privilege and your perspective, build that all together. That's personal innovation. That's a way to build a better world within yourself so you can make a better world outside of yourself.
absolutely. And there's lots of ways that everybody listening can do this that aren't something that maybe puts you in a place where you feel uncomfortable
Mhm.
in talking to others, because I know that being that voice can be challenging and can be scary and can put you at risk if you don't have that level of privilege. But there are things that you can do just to get yourself ready for it. Like a friend of mine for 2020 challenged herself to only read books by women of color. So all of 2020, that's what she did. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take on that challenge. So 2021, I only read books by women of color. I don't know what next year's challenge is going to be, but I'm going to find something. Because there's ways that we can change our perspective and shape the way we think about the world that will allow us to organically get there.
Absolutely. And I like what you said. Like you might not feel comfortable stepping out and saying these things outwardly, but I mean, if you start with you, you can take the steps you need. And a lot of times that's going to end up coming out of you anyway. It's going to begin to push the needle forward, as they say. No, move the needle forward. Move the needle forward. Don't push the needle forward. I hope everyone's been vaccinated. But but like the idea is like it's cheesy and just be the change you want to see in the world. We can use lots of cliches and stuff, but at the same time, like it's not inaccurate. Everything you do starts with yourself. If you want to, promote things that are good for society and stuff, you got to start with you to see what's going on with you, what your perspective is. You can't learn another perspective until you know what your own is. I think that's true across the board. You can't say to yourself like, oh, I totally understand how open source works. I've been an enterprise developer my whole life, but I read a couple things. Like, no, maybe get that. Like, it's true across the board. Very few things are, but.
And a huge part of that is learning in public.
Exactly.
I'm going to be really transparent here. I'm ADHD. And for most of my life, I was really, really ashamed of this. I didn't talk about it. I didn't ask for any sort of help. I was like, this is my burden. I'm going to carry it. And one day I realized, well, why don't I ask for help? Why don't I ever say like, hey, can we follow this conversation up with an email? Because part of this is like verbal processing stuff. And I won't remember what our conversation was. So send me an email just with notes, and it was as simple as that. And I said, why don't I ever ask anybody for this? And they said, oh, because I haven't seen anybody ask for this. So when you start to learn in public and challenge yourself to do something new, other people get to take that opportunity.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because one thing I didn't mention in my talk is one of the other things that I do is I'm on the board of OSMI, which is Open Sourcing Mental Illness. We're actually changing the name to OSMH, which is Open Sourcing Mental Health. But we do have, if you have an event and you'd like somebody to speak about how tech people are affected by ADHD, ADD, burnout, bipolar disorder, socializing anxiety, OCD. We have people that will help talk about that. Check out osmihelp.org. They also have great guides on how to talk about these things at work, how to get in touch with mental health first aid. And it's just a wonderful organization that I'm happy to have been a part of for so many years.
That's awesome. I'm going to look it up.
Definitely.
All right. And it looks like Melissa is just about ready. So PJ, thank you so much. That talk was great. This conversation was awesome. It was so nice to get to meet you.
It was great meeting you too. And take care. And great that you brought up another Buffalo person in the talk. That's, go Jamie. Everybody go follow Jamie and watch all of their talks.
Yeah. Jamie is awesome. I think it's at Jamie Bash on Twitter.
At Jamie Bash. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye everybody.
Bye.